Welcome to part 2 of the setup analysis featuring the Dunlop Srixon Revo CX 2.0 as the racket, and the main strings are the PolyStar Strike 1.25, the crosses are the Isospeed v18 1.12mm gauge, and I've also got 4 string savers. They would be on the 4th cross string from the top, on the 2 middle main strings, and then again on the 6th cross string from the top, again on the 2 middle main strings. And the reason for this, like in the previous setup analysis, that was to provide a little bit more height and line control while not increasing the shot speed too much, so I lose length control like I did in the first setup analysis using the dampener. In this test, we were using older balls that had been used for a couple of matches, so we can expect a little bit less height and line control because the balls compress more on impact, and more movement tends to mean more variance in the angle that the ball can come off of your string bed. And also the conditions are going to be a lot slower because the ball doesn't carry through the court as much. As it compresses on the surface, it tends to sit up. So we are going to have to be prepared to play longer rallies in conditions like these, and also we can't be as aggressive as we would like, as our control over the height and line doesn't allow us to be aggressive all the time. We have to play with a little bit of margin for error to avoid increasing our error rate too much to the point where it's detrimental on our performance. Okay, I'm going to talk about the first set of this practice match. And to begin with, the height and the line control was actually pretty reasonable, considering that the balls we're using were old and had lost quite a bit of pressure. So that's the main one that bothers me, is the lack of pressure in a ball. That increases the variance with which both the height and line can come off, and obviously decreases the accuracy as well. So considering all of that, I was pleased with how the setup performed, and also had a decent amount of weight of shot. So the ball was carrying through the court, and considering I don't use quite a severe upward swing on my ground strokes, the amount of spin on the shots was pretty good as well, so I can't complain in that regard at all. In fact, it was pretty impressive considering, again, as I said, the balls had lost quite a lot of pressure, and in that situation you do lose pace and spin. However, there was a noticeable decline in the amount of turn and bounce off of the surface for the kick serve, and that meant that I was starting a lot of second serve points off either neutral or behind the rally, which means I've got to defend straight away from the off. And that increase in pressure is never really going to be a good thing. It's not going to improve your percentages having to defend straight from the second serve. And so that is something I'm going to have to note, that I wasn't getting enough turn and bounce off of the kick serve, especially on a hard court. I know these indoor courts don't tend to bounce as high as some of the grittier hard courts we've experienced in the past, but even so, I'd expect a little bit more help for my serve, so I don't have to defend as much off of that particular shot. If I can't find more pace and spin consistently off of that kick serve, then I may look to improve the accuracy and the consistency of the second serve, so I'll be able to hopefully go closer to the lines more often, and I'll apply pressure onto my opponent that way, stop him from attacking the second serve. But that's my plan B. I'm hopefully looking to improve the speed and the pace of the kick serve to try and get more turn and bounce off of the surface, and hopefully get some free points that way, or at least start more of these rallies on the front foot. And while we're still on the subject of the second serve, I would like the setup to have more access to a flat or a slice second serve, as these types of serves tend to stay lower, and with the balls losing pressure, that tends to actually accentuate the lower bounce of the slice serve or the flatter serve. And conversely with the kick serve, because the older balls don't turn off of the surface or bounce as high, it tends to be easier to attack for the returner. and therefore a flatter or a slice second serve is definitely something I would like to add to my arsenal. It's just not there with this setup at the moment, not there in consistency, and so I don't feel like it's a safe option to use consistently in my matches. Right, moving on to the second set, and now we're getting into an hour of play. So these balls have been used, I think, for a couple matches and also for the first set, and they've lost even more pressure, and the control over height and line has decreased really to levels that I don't think are acceptable. It's not enjoyable to play with anymore, and on top of that, aggression is not rewarded as often as it was in the first set or in the previous two matches, and therefore stamina and rally tolerance become more of a factor and often decide the winner of the overall outcome of the match. So it's not something that I particularly enjoy, but because, you know, we aren't changing balls every 8 games, and in tournaments I know they reuse balls for like the quarterfinals, semi-finals or the finals just to save money, which I get is not ideal for the players, but because that's a situation that we could face, we kind of have to tailor the setup to be able to cope with the changing conditions. And therefore this setup I don't feel is ideal in terms of dealing with the older balls that have lost a significant amount of pressure, because while the length control is superb, the height and the line control, even with the string savers adding in that department and helping in that department, it just isn't enough to give us access to the type of rally tolerance we need really to take the setup to another level and overall take our own performance up another level. This is a player who really does thrive in conditions where stamina becomes more of a factor in the outcome, and so I need to try and nullify that, as well as trying to improve my own conditioning to better prepare myself for matches where we are going to go deep. We are going to play a lot of extended rallies, and a lot of the times these extended rallies, they don't just win you 1 point, they can win you 2 or 3 if they take the wind out of your opponent sufficiently enough. And therefore going forward, I think the most immediate thing I'd like to improve is the control over the height and line, and this must come without increasing the shot speed and spin. There is no point increasing the control over height and line if we're just going to lose control over length. They must all improve, or at least one improves and the rest stays at the level it currently is, if we're really going to improve our performance in slower conditions. So that basically is the main takeaway from this particular practice match. It really highlighted the importance for the next changes in the setup to be tailored towards slower conditions, and that is what I'm planning to do. And so a quick recap of this setup analysis. We played this practice test indoors, but with older balls that had lost quite a bit of pressure. The setup performed quite well in the first set, judging from the performance and looking back at the video, but by the time the second set had rolled around, the performance had decreased significantly to the point where I was really fed up and not happy at all with it. And also, while the serves were pretty good throughout the match, to be fair, I still would like more access to flatter or slice second serves to try and take advantage of the older balls not bouncing up on this surface as much as the newer balls. And also, when I kick serve with the older balls without a lot of pressure, they don't bounce as high, they don't turn off the surface as high, and they don't carry through to your opponent as quickly, and therefore it makes it easier for our opponent to return more aggressively, and as a result we're defending off of the second serve a bit too much for my liking. Okay, that's the end of this setup analysis. I really did enjoy testing this racket and the string setup inside it. It was very interesting. I was able to execute a few shots that usually I wouldn't be able to do so at quite such a high level. But either way, whether it is a positive or a negative experience, it's all useful data, and I will certainly archive this for future reference. The next setup that I'm going to be testing involves the Vocal Organics V1 MP. So the oversized version of that racket has already featured on this channel. We are going to be trying out the Mid Plus version. I'll be doing a preview on that, so we can go a little bit more into detail about what we can expect out on court, and then of course we'll do another analysis of that setup. But yeah, if you are still watching, I want to thank you very much for doing so. I do appreciate it. And if you found it interesting, it might be worth checking out the other videos on this channel and staying tuned for future videos coming out soon. So hopefully I'll see you all there. And until then, everyone, take care.